Help! The monster of the lagoon! At that point, I decided I had to clean myself up. I was stinky and slimy, and my stomach was growling up a storm. I was starving. Lucky for me, just then I spotted a cafe still open in the square. I made my way to one of the elegant outside tables. Big mistake. Just as I arrived, I saw her little pink polka dot hat and her fake eyelashes. It was the rodent of my nightmares. As soon as she spotted me, she yelled, "Oh!" The rodent next to her shrieked, "Eee!" The waiter by the door shouted, "Ah!" Then there were the sound of breaking glass, clanging silverware, and chattering trays. And before I knew it, everyone ran off, screaming, "Help! It's the mouse monster of the lagoon!" I looked around in a panic. Monster? Could there really be a monster on the loose? My heart began hammering as fast as a drum. Who plays on the new Wild Whiskers CD, Cheddar's Burning? I entered the deserted cafe on shaky paws and quickly hightailed it to the bathroom to get cleaned up. But when I looked up, I saw a monstrous creature covered in algae, pigeon droppings, and mud. "Help! It's the mouse monster of the lagoon!" I shrieked. 2 seconds later, I realized that I was standing in front of a giant mirror. The mouse monster of the lagoon was me. Horrified, I locked the door and began to clean myself up. First, I washed myself from head to tail. Then I dried myself with a paw dryer. Then I rubbed myself with scented napkins and brushed my fur with a fork. And finally, I ripped a rose from a floral bouquet that was used to decorate the bathroom and placed it in my lapel. Only then did I smile in satisfaction. I left the bathroom all cleaned up and feeling great. At last, I could get down to business and start working on the mystery in Venice. Whistling a happy tune, I sat down at one of the empty tables in the cafe. After a while, a waiter who had been hiding behind the door came over. "May I take your order?" he stammered. I was about to respond when he whispered in my ear, "Sorry if I seem nervous. I just saw the mouse monster of the lagoon." I felt awful. The poor mouse was a scampering bundle of nerves, and it was all my fault. Still, I didn't want to admit that I was actually the monster. So instead I said, "Don't worry, I scared him away for good." The waiter shot me a look of admiration and ran away. A moment later, he turned with a huge plate of expensive assorted cheeses. "This one is on the house," he exclaimed. "You are an incredibly brave mouse to stand up to such a horrifying monster." I shook my head. "I didn't do anything," I spluttered. But he waved me off. Leaving the cafe, I was bombarded by enthusiastic lady mice who wanted my autograph. Suddenly, I saw a hat with pink polka dots and fake eyelashes. It was her, the rodent of my nightmares. I sprinted away as fast as my paws could carry me. I had to hide. When I spotted the most luxurious hotel in all of Venice, I went in. What else could I do? Sharp Whiskers House of Glass. Only when I closed the door to my hotel room was I able to relax. I was finally out of danger. I threw myself on the bed, completely dressed, and fell into a deep, deep sleep. The next morning, I took the first steamboat to the island of Murano. Murano is famous all over the world for its shops where crystal and glass are made. I began to visit the glass factories. I examined all the store windows one by one. They are full of colored glass objects, little puppies, little fish, small horses, and wonderful families of octopuses. But I didn't see a single gondola. Disappointed, I sat on the handrail of a bridge. I had been walking for hours. My paws throbbed, my back ached, and even worse, I wasn't any closer to solving the mystery in Venice. I must have looked pretty sad because a young mouselet approached me. He told me his name was Twitchy and he asked if he could help me. I'm looking for a crystal gondola that lights up, plays a little song, and is incredibly ugly, I explained. Twitchy burst out laughing. My uncle makes those, but no one buys them. He makes all kinds of gondolas, and each one is more horrendous than the next. Twitchy went on. Let's see. The last gondola he sold was about a month ago. It was to some mouse from New Mouse City who has a stand at a flea market. A jolt of excitement ran through me, like when you rub your paws on a fuddy rug and then touch something metal. Zap! The gondola Twitchy was talking about had to be the one Petunia had bought for me at the flea market. Twitchy led me to a worn-down shop with a window filled with gondolas, each one more awful than the one before. But he warned me, don't tell my Uncle Sharp Whisker you think his gondolas are ugly. He has anger issues. One lets out a terrible smell. One breaks every single pencil point. One is a phone with an annoying ring. One has a radio that is never in tune. One can tell when it's raining. Right then, a hairy paw grabbed me by the ear and pulled me into the shop. I'm Stuart Sharp Whisker. You're here for the apprentice position, right? He squeaked. I gulped. What position do you mean? I stammered. Sharp Whisker grabbed my snout and pulled me close to a sign on the door. What? He yelled. You mean you aren't here for this? Only then did I realize what was written on the sign. Apprentice wanted. Someone who works a lot, accepts low pay, and never complains. It was the perfect opportunity to do my investigation and not be discovered. Yes, I'm here for the position, but I mumbled, no buts, fuzzball. Sharp Whisker declared, you're hired. But I tried again. You're already complaining, he shrieked. I quickly shook my head. There was no sense getting an angry mouse even angrier. Still, I had wanted to tell him that I didn't know how to work with glass, but I never got the chance. A second later, Sharp Whisker took off his smock and hung it around my neck. I want 50 crystal gondolas by tomorrow morning, he demanded loudly. Then he left, slamming the door behind him. I took the opportunity to look around the shop. I noticed lots of trophies and medals and a photo of 4 gondoliers wearing shirts that read Sharp Whisker's House of Glass. I guess old Sharp Whisker was a gondola race enthusiast. I was still studying the photo when Twitchy finally entered the shop. "He hired you?" he remarked. "Congratulations, but he'll probably fire you within 2 hours. "It may be even sooner," I sobbed. "I have no idea how to work with glass." Working with glass. Glass blowing is a method that is used by artisans to shape glass. You place the end of a metal pole in melted glass and then blow into the other end of the pole. The glass inflates and is in shape while it is still soft. Another method makes use of pliers to shape the melted glass. Sniff, sigh, sniff. Itchy explained to me how to take the glass, shape it, and put it in the oven. I thought I had understood everything, but as soon as Twitchy left the shop, the problem started. I singed my whiskers, I burned my tail, and smoked my snout. And when I finally managed to shape something that looks sort of like a gondola, my pieces exploded one after the next, and they collapsed like poorly made soffles. What a disaster! In the end, a massive tower of misshapen melted glass that didn't look anything like a gondola stood in the middle of the floor. I felt like a total failure. My whiskers drooped and my heart sank. Oh, how had I gotten myself into such a mess? Old Sharp Whisker was going to have a fit when he saw the huge lump of glass I have created. I pictured him chasing me with a poker hot from the fire and me running from him through the twisting streets of Venice. I'd have to keep running for the rest of my life or move to some faraway island. I'd never return to Newmouth City or see my beloved family again. I was so distraught. I began to sob like a sprinkler stuck on high speed. Oh, why hadn't I stayed home? Only then, between one sob and the next, did I hear that someone else was also crying. Who could it be? Maybe it was a ghost. Even though my paws were shaking with fear, I decided I had to investigate. After all, I had come to Venice to solve a mystery, and unexplained crying sounds were certainly mysterious. I followed the sounds of the sobs, and I realized they were coming from somewhere above me. Maybe there was a secret room. I looked everywhere until I found a small door. I opened it and saw a dark stairway that led to an upper level. I took a flashlight and climbed the creaking wooden stairs. Crickety-click. Meanwhile, the sobs continued. Sniff, sigh, sniff. At the top of the stairs, there was another door. I opened it and heard a terrible scream. "Help! A monster!" the voice cried out. I looked around. Hadn't I just been through a monster scare? I was all cleaned up now. How could someone mistake me for a monster again? Then I realized I was holding the flashlight under my snout, lighting my face up like a mad mouse. Oops! I quickly turned the flashlight on the screaming figure who was all dressed in white. "Help! A ghost!" I shrieked. Then I realized it was only a female mouse dressed in a white nightgown. She looked at me in confusion. I felt like a fool. I had been afraid of a mouse in pajamas. She still had tears in her eyes, so I lent her my handkerchief. "Sorry if I scared you," I said in a soothing voice. The mystery of the crystal gondola. The mouse blew her nose loudly in my handkerchief. "Honk, honk, honk. Good thing I brought an extra." After she had finished, I pulled out the small note I had found in the crystal gondola. Then I showed it to her. "You wrote this, didn't you?" I guessed. She smiled shyly. "Yes, I don't know what I was thinking," she explained. "Who puts a message in a bottle anymore, right? I know it's a ridiculous idea. I guess I was just desperate for help and I didn't know how else to find it." The mouse told me her name was Hope. I told her I had come to Venice to help her. "That's so sweet," she blubbered, tears rolling down her fur. "But I'm afraid I don't know how you can do that. You see, the problem is that my uncle Stuart Sharp-Whisker won't give me permission to marry my beloved Arnold. Oh, Arnie." I gave her my extra handkerchief so we both wouldn't drown in her tears. Finally, after a few more snorts into my extra handkerchief, too bad I hadn't bought a third, Hope explained that Arnie was a terrible glassmaker. "Me too," I interrupted. "You should see the mess I made downstairs in the shop. I think your uncle is going to fire me." "Probably," Hope agreed. "That's what happened to my poor Arnie. My uncle kicked him out right on his tail. He says I can only marry a rodent who is an expert glassmaker so he can take over the business someday. It's so unfair. I love Arnie and I want to marry him." I nodded sympathetically as she continued. "I locked myself up in this antique so my uncle will know how serious I am about Arnie," Hope added. She gave me back a sobbing handkerchief. I coughed and felt a tinkle in my nose. Did you ever notice that when you're trying not to do something like sneeze, you sometimes feel like you can't stop it from happening? "I promise to help you," I told Hope, wiggling my nose. "But you must promise that you will stop crying and go do something fun with your friends. Everything will be okay. Achoo!" At that moment, I let out a sneeze so powerful it shook the room. Since I had no handkerchief, I had to blow my nose in my sleeve. So embarrassing. But I didn't have much time to think about it because just then a voice thundered from downstairs. "Who made this mess?" I cringed. Old Sharp-Whisker was in the house and he sounded less happy. Yup, even though I had solved the mystery in Venice, I had a terrible feeling my troubles were far from over. Unfortunately, I was right. The minute I went downstairs, Sharp-Whisker pointed a lumpy pile of glass I had created. "You're fired," he screeched. He probably would have thrown me out the door by my whiskers if it hadn't opened at that exact moment. The rodent who came in looked closely with an expert air at my misshapen pile of glass. "What an unbelievable sculpture!" he murmured. "It's a modern masterpiece. I'll buy it." Old Whisker charged the guy a fortune for the lump of glass. I tried to slip away, but I was too slow. Sharp Whisker grabbed me by the ear. "Get back here," he yelled. "We're here to help." The next day at sunset, I left the shop and went to the dock where Sharp Whisker's gondola was anchored. It was an old, peeling mess. Even worse, the boat was sucking water like my uncle Adventure Mouse after his 3-week excursion through the desert. Alarmed, I glanced around at the other racing boats that were docked next to Sharp Whisker's boat. Not only were they beautiful, but they were in tip-top shape. I began to sob in desperation. Oh, why do I always get myself into these ridiculous situations? Right then, a familiar voice interrupted my crying jag. "What's with the waterworks, dear mister? You're such a crybaby." I turned to find my cousin Trap laughing at me. Next to him stood my sister Thea, my nephew Benjamin, Petunia Prettypaws, and her niece Bugsy Wugsy. "We're here to help, Uncle Geronimo," squeaked Benjamin. I was so happy to see my family and friends. I hugged everyone. Then I told them all about my adventures so far in Venice. I explained about the big race that was to be held the following Sunday and about my plan to convince Sharp Whisker to let Hope and Arnold get married. "What a romantic story," Petunia and Thea whispered. Trap just rolled his eyes. "I'm getting cavities with all of this gushing sweetness," he grumbled. A few minutes later, Thea got down to business. "Okay, everyone, there's no time to stand around shooting the cheese. We've got to do work. We've got to get in shape for the big race." She pulled a whistle out. "Tweet, tweet." "We'll begin with the sprint," she squeaked. After 10 minutes, I crashed to the ground. Trap fell on top of me, then Benjamin, followed by Petunia, and finally Bugsy Wugsy. "Help!" I squeaked from underneath the pile of mice. Oh, what a disaster! If we kept going at this rate, we'd never make it to the race on Sunday. As soon as we untangled ourselves, I turned to Thea and said in my nicest voice, "I know we need to get in shape, but before we do that, I think we should find a new racing gondola. Then we can work out and practice rowing at the same time. Isn't that a great idea?" My sister looked insulted. Did I mention she likes to be the boss of everything? She shot me a look. I could tell she was about to give me a piece of her mind, when suddenly a sleek gondola slipped into the canal. It was a vibrant yellow, and it was being rowed by none other than Hope Sharp Whisker. Hope rowed up to the dock and waved. "I heard about your plan, Geronimo, and I will do everything I can to help you win. Here, take this gondola. It was made by my Arnold. He is an amazing carpenter." I looked at the gondola. Hope wasn't exaggerating. Arnold truly was an amazing carpenter. It was exquisite. Before I could thank her, she took off down the dock. "I'm off to see my friends," she called back. We're going to make you some fab mouse uniforms. I smiled as Hope disappeared around the corner. She was such a different mouse from the one I had met in Old Shop Whisker's attic. She had changed from a total sad sack into, well, someone hopeful. I guess that just goes to show you how powerful love can be. Tweet, tweet. The next week was a nightmare. During the day, I worked in the glass shop. In the evenings, I trained with my family and friends. First, Tia had us run for miles and miles. Then she made us practice rowing for hours and hours. What a workout! Every night, I dreamed about training. I pictured myself running up an impossibly steep mountain and rowing across an impossibly wide ocean. The whole time I could just hear Tia's whistle blasting in my ear. Tweet, tweet. I was so exhausted I could barely comb my fur in the morning. It stuck up all over the place. I was a mess. I was starting to look like the lead singer from the popular punk band Wild Ratitudes. Still, what could I do? I had to keep going. Hope was counting on me. Unfortunately, as the day of the race approached, I grew more and more nervous. It didn't help that old sharp whisker continued to threaten me every day. You'd better not make me like a fool, or you'll be sorry, he would roar in my snout. Luckily, every time I started feeling scared, Benjamin and Bugsy Wugsy were there to encourage me. Come on, Uncle G, you can do it, they cheered. And luckily, every time I wanted to skip training, Tia would show up with her trusty whistle and a pep talk. Tweet, tweet. Come on, Jer. Keep those paws moving. And luckily, every time I was just feeling low, Petunia would flash me a sweet smile. Even my obnoxious cousin, Trap, kept me going with his awful jokes. The more time passed, the stronger our team got, and the luckier I felt that I had such a great family and friends. At last, it was the day of the historic regatta. I was excited and nervous at the same time. Before the race, there is a magnificent costume parade on the Grand Canal. First comes the Bosin Toro, a luxury boat, followed by other amazing decorative boats. What an unbelievable show! I was so entranced with the boats, I almost forgot about the race. But just as I began to relax, I spotted Sharp Whisker in the crowd. The historic Regatta of Venice. The regatta is held every year on the first Sunday of September. First held on January 10th, 1315, the regatta has gained various religious, political, and military meanings through the centuries. After a historic boat procession, the race begins. The Puparini boats are used by young male rowers. The Mascarete boats are used in the female race, and the Caor line are large river transportation boats. Finally, there is the champion races on two old gondolini boats. which are very light and slim. You'd better not make me look like a fool or you'll be sorry, Sharp Whiskers shrieked. Just then the judge started the race. Immediately, my teammates began to row as fast as they could. But my paws were petrified. I was completely frozen with fear. After a few minutes, we were in last place. The crowd laughed at us. Ha ha ha. Love is a marvelous thing. Everything seemed lost until something unexpected happened. As we were floating around the Grand Canal, I suddenly spied a rodent wearing a pink polka dot hat. It was her, the rodent of my nightmares. When she saw me, she began squeaking like a mad mouse. My darling, my beloved, I finally found you. I was horrified. Right then, I felt a surge of energy shot through my body. I had to get away. I began to row so hard, my paws seemed like windmills. Over the loudspeaker, the announcer commented enthusiastically, "And here comes the team from Sharp Whiskers House of Glass. Holy cheese, they're picking up speed. It's incredible. That yellow gondola is on fire. The crowd is going wild. Now it's down to the finish line. And the winner is Sharp Whiskers House of Glass." I couldn't believe it. We had won. Hooray! Benjamin and Bugsy Wugsy yelled. Meanwhile, Petunia gave me a strange look. Gee, who was that lady with the pink polka dot hat? She asked, and why was she calling you darling? I turned purple with embarrassment. Well, I don't really know her, I began, but before I could explain any further, we were invited to go to the platform to get our prize. Once I was on stage, I saw a mouse with a familiar pink polka dot hat. It was her, the rodent of my nightmares. She was the assistant to the master of ceremonies. She put a red flag in my paw. That's the traditional prize for the historic regatta. Then she planted a kiss on my snout. "You can't run away anymore," she squeaked. "I have to kiss the winners. That's the tradition. Plus, you said you were going to marry me, right, my little Venetian fuzzy fur?" Petunia frowned. "I thought you said you didn't know her, G," she said, sniffing and looking hurt. I felt like screaming. Oh, how do I always manage to make a mess of things? "I don't know her," I told Petunia. "She's been following me since I arrived in Venice. And she's got it in her head that she wants to marry me." Then I turned to my admirer. "I'm sorry, I don't want to marry you, miss," I explained calmly. "I'm very flattered, but I don't even know your name. And also, I'm not from Venice. I'm from New Mouse City on Mouse Island." She looked at me with disappointment. "You're serious? You're not from Venice? Well, then you can forget it, fuzzball," she snapped. Then she turned to Sharp Whisker and looked him over. "And you, dear sir," she asked, "where might you be from?" "I am 100% Venetian," he responded. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Well then, you're the rodent of my dreams," she gushed. Sharp Whisker blushed under his dark whiskers. Then he gladly kissed her paw. It was official. Stuart Sharpwhisker had fallen head over heels in love. He couldn't take his eyes off his new lady mouse, and she giggled with delight. I decided now was the perfect time to remind him of his promise. Excuse me, sorry to bother you, but you promised that if I won the race, you would give me what I wanted, I said. Of course, he thundered. What do you want? Money, a house, a lifetime supply of crystal gondolas? I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and spit it out. No, I don't want anything for myself. I want you to give it to your niece. Hope, permission to marry Arnold, the love of her life. And you can't make him work at the glass shop anymore. He's an amazing carpenter. When I had finished, Sharpwhisker turned a deep shade of red. I thought he would explode, but instead he smiled. Now that I know what it's like to be in love, I understand my niece, he said. Love is a marvelous thing. She must follow her heart. I grinned. It seemed my mission in Venice was finished. Love truly is a marvelous thing.